I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Shuaib Lwasa, who is a professor of urban resilience and global development at the International Institute for Social Studies. Thank you so much. Shuaib, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Malini, for the kind introduction. I would like to pick a few threads from the presentation by Jinti to continue throwing light on the kind of strategies that might be useful for you as legislators in terms of catalytic actors, but also directly implementing actors to build resilience by addressing systemic risk. The first thread is the call, the global call that it's a precondition to mainstream risk reduction in all development initiatives for sustainable development. I think that is very clear. And secondly, we also have to reflect a little bit on the over 13 years of calling for finance to address adaptation and resilience build to climate change at a scale that is needed to have impact across different geographies. I think that's also a very important thread to pick from there. And with that, I weave in the lessons from the midterm review of Sendai by recognizing how the progress in strengthening risk governance. A good number of nation states have institutions, agencies, but also laws and regulations that are addressing risk governance, which is good. But there is more to do, as partly also reflected in the previous presentation by Jinti. So I have a few points that I would like to mention that could possibly, hopefully, help all of us to inflect a little bit in regard to how we can address systemic risk in our respective roles. One of the first one is about the interconnectedness of the globe, the different value chains, the different systems, even with distant relations. There are many places that are connected globally that are not necessarily physically contiguous, but what happens in one place actually triggers impacts, often negative impacts elsewhere, without any physical contiguity with that particular place. That is a very important aspect, and we have seen that with the most recent examples of the pandemic, but also the cascade of risks across geographies. It's, again, many examples that we can think about through multiple sectors that is actually pushing the limits of adapting to climate extremes as we're experiencing them. That underscores the importance of policy and implementation of policy and strengthening institutions in order to reverse the trend by building resilience within the different development systems as we know them. So there are a couple of different possible pathways that we can think about. And the first one is actually building on the existing strengthened risk governance by extending further, going beyond that, to allow to build on existing policies and regulations that would deliver transformative change in addressing systemic risk. By systemic risk, it could mean that one particular hazard in a particular geography triggers multiple or other hazards elsewhere, either of the same type or a different type. But it could also imply, or it could mean, that when we have processes of development, asset building, process of livelihood protection or livelihood establishment which resonates to many people across the globe, then we can systemically through institutional build, through the institutions, create risk. And that is the point, the thread that I picked earlier. And we have to be worried about the risk creation that is associated with current institutional processes, particularly public institutions in promoting development across the board. And there are a few things that can be done. One is building on existing risk reduction knowledge that we know. So one of the very specific granular example of that, which is also at scale now, is the continuous promotion of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are a good thing. Nature is an ally to all of us and the planet. And the IPCC Special Report on Land and Climate Change is very clear about that in terms of building and enhancing synergies around that. But it is also very important to take a step back and reflect that nature-based solutions have been around for a long time and applied at multiple scales. So we need to build on that knowledge. A lot of it is described as indigenous knowledge. Some of it is described as traditional environmental knowledge. How do we build on that knowledge? When we can actually do that by going beyond risk assessments as add-ons. By add-ons, I mean, if you have a development initiative or project at whatever scale, there is, because of the strengthening of risk governance, there's a risk assessment exercise. But it shouldn't stop at that. It should also be integrated into the performance indicators so that along the implementation of whatever development initiative or project, there is continuous tracking of progress on the outcomes of the risk proofing of those particular developments. So it matters a lot for public expenditure mechanisms to do that. It matters a lot for procurement processes to do that. And it matters a lot if performance indicators, risk performance indicators are part of the public expenditure and accountability mechanisms that very much, as legislators, I imagine, are very familiar with. And there you can really play a very catalytic role by making different agencies, not only public, but even private sector or non-state actors, to be accountable to risk-proof development initiatives, risk-proof assets of different scales in different geographies. The second point I would also like to bring up is that a lot of investments are going into development to achieve economic prosperity and sustainability. It matters how we develop, it matters where we develop, and the choices that are made in respect to how cities are developed, infrastructure is developed, agricultural development programs, tourism development programs, or even other kind of national and micro-scale assets, right from the individual household all the way up to infrastructure or investments that connect us globally. It is very important that we avoid the lock-in, what I would call risk lock-in, by actually going again beyond the risk assessments and value the importance of the discounting factor of hazards to those investments. So for every unit currency that is invested in a particular development or project, over time, depending on the exposure, that investment will be discounted by the impact, depending on the magnitude of the climate extremes as we are seeing them. So by bringing that into, as highlighted by the example of the Netherlands, by Genti, it becomes very important. And as legislators, again, the role that you could play could be at two levels. One, catalytic level, by making public processes for investment to be much more accountable to that, but also being direct involved actors in development in your constituencies. It matters a lot to bring that risk assessment in there. I want to highlight, as I move towards the end of my intervention, to say that if systemic risk is going to be addressed adequately, of course, with recognition of the uncertainties, that there are limits, then it's going to be concurrent implementation of systemic risk reduction interventions. It is about finance, it's about investments, it's about development, it's about building livelihoods and communities and people. It's about protecting and enhancing or restoring nature through nature-based solutions, which we know that nature responds much more slowly. So there are a couple of things that you're already perhaps immersed with or had a lot in respect to breakthroughs, in respect to acceleration, in respect to bold ideas, solutions to scale. All those are important, but it is critically important for systemic risk reduction to start with what there is and try to build for a cumulative impact on reducing systemic risk. And it doesn't mean that scale is not important. Scale is important. Finance is very important, but all these may not be the panacea. And it's understandable when we talk of scale, bold ideas, solutions, breakthroughs, it's understandable that the desire is actually to try and reduce the impact and magnitude, like the case of some of the most recent experiences. So I just want to end my intervention here by saying that it's going to be important also to start thinking about the shift in agency. So again, in one of the sessions earlier, there was talk about civil society, there was talk about executive, legislation, judiciary, private sector, and communities. Agency is also going to be important if there is recognition and valuation of what there is as is known, that is practiced at community level, that we describe as traditional environmental knowledge or indigenous knowledge, and how to bring that into mainstream development to reduce systemic risk. And I would like to end here and thank you so much for your attention. So I did not use PowerPoint, but I thought that I would share with you some of my reflections on addressing systemic risk. And I hope it's helpful. Thank you.
It was indeed very helpful. Thank you so much, Shuaib. And indeed, it felt like a town hall, because we will, of course, we'll have PowerPoints, but I think there's direct talking, and you began with describing your words as being inflective. Are they inflective? They're reflective. Because, of course, if we don't reflect on what we haven't learned, I was thinking most recently with the Pakistan floods, we didn't learn enough from the 2010 floods, because the floods have been more epic, and the last one was called an epic flood. So what are we learning from these cascading monster disasters?